certain and contingent are not necessarily mutually exclusive. And in both of these cases, for both human beings and angels, God gave them free will, and therefore it was contingent that they would fall. They were not programmed to use their free will to fall, because if they had been programmed to do so, it wouldn't have been free will. It would be programmed will. However, God has foreknowledge of the future. So as soon as, in the moment he created humans and angels, he knew how they would misuse their free will. I think the better contrast, rather than certain and contingent, would be determined or contingent. It was not determined that they would use their free will this way, but it was certain they would use their free will this way.
All right. Patrick goes on. He's got several questions, as a matter of fact. I'm just realizing there's a list of them here. So his follow-up to that, I guess, is, if it is certain, could God create other rational beings for whom their fall would be contingent, and could they potentially persist perpetually in the state of grace and obedience to God?
So God could create other rational beings and who would also share free will, and therefore their fall or non-fall would also be contingent. And because it's contingent, some of them might have elected the other option and decided to remain in God's grace and obedience.
Okay, and then continuing with Patrick's question, if it is contingent, could another human couple, same nature, different identity, have persisted in the state of grace and obedience to God perpetually in the Garden of Eden?
Well, if God put another human couple in the Garden of Eden, then yes, they wouldn't have to fall, unless Adam and Eve were the federal heads of the race, so that what their actions did would affect every other member of the race. On the federal headship model, if Adam and Eve go down, everybody goes down. It's kind of like, killing the king vampire in a single point of failure vampire story, where you kill the king vampire and all the other vampires die. So if that's how God structured our race, then Adam and Eve going down would take down everybody. But if he didn't structure our race that way, then every human would be individual, and in terms of their fallenness. And therefore, if Adam and Eve went down, other people could stay in a state of grace.
And Patrick continues. Patrick, you were nothing if not thorough here. For the angels, if they transcend space and time, how do we understand before and after, in heaven and not in heaven, with respect to their fall?
So angels transcend space in that they don't have physical bodies that occupy spatial locations. However, they don't transcend time. There is before and after for angels. So there's a state before angels fell, a state after angels fell. Just like with human souls, there is a state before we die, there's a state after we die and before we're resurrected, and then there's a state after we're resurrected. What may be the case is that angels and human souls in the afterlife may experience time differently than we do. It may be faster or slower, or both faster and slower at different times. Kind of the same way that, you look at some creatures here on Earth, they have different perceptions of time than humans do. Like if you've ever tried to swat a fly, it's really hard, because they're operating at a faster pace than we are. They perceive time going by more slowly than we do, and so to them we look like we're moving incredibly slowly. However, there are other creatures that seem to experience time moving faster than we do, so they appear to be slow to us, like sloths. Although that doesn't stop baby sloths from being very cute and making very cute noises. So just like we see other creatures here on Earth with different perceptions of time, it may be that angels and discarnate human spirits also perceive time at different rates than we do, but they still have it.
Patrick, thank you very much for that, for the lessons in the fall there of humans and angels. It's about time for us to take a break. I think my wife showed me a video of a baby sloth. Is this going around on the internet? Is that why that came up? or
I don't know. It's been some time since I've seen a video of baby sloths, but I have
oh,
seen a video of a baby sloth being very cute and making very cute noises.
all right. We'll take a quick break. Right back with more weird questions with Jimmy Akin right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
EWTN, teaching the truth.
Well, I don't think we're like the typical college students because we really hang out at our campus ministry and everything. It's amazing about how much more connected you feel. We share really cool articles from actually you guys, EWTN, and like what you were saying about evangelization. So that's really nice.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Yesterday, as we mentioned yesterday, was the Feast of Justin Martyr. And so here's what Carrie's got going over at shop.catholic.com. From now through Monday, June 5th, you can save 30% off everything in Apologists Alley. That's a section of our shop at shop.catholic.com. Just use the promo code Justin in honor of Justin Martyr, and you get that 30% off at checkout. All books, ebooks, MP3s, School of Apologetics courses, and more by your favorite Catholic Answers apologists. 30% off when you use the promo code Justin today through June 5th at shop.catholic.com. Weird questions with Jimmy Akin today. And we enjoy the weird questions, and they get pretty weird sometimes.
So we have a section of the shop called Apologists Alley.
I guess so. That's what
and that's alliterative.
Yeah, it's yes, it is Apologist Alley.
That's not the only alliterative alley I'm familiar with. Have you ever heard Allen's Alley?
No, I don't know Allen's Alley.
It's from old time radio. I forget. So Allen, I forget his first name, was a radio personality.
Maybe Steve Allen, who became the.
It wasn't Steve.
Oh, it wasn't
Allen.
Steve Allen. Okay,
it was somebody else. But he had an alley, a fictional alley that was inhabited by various characters, and he would go down the alley and interview the characters and hear what was happening in their lives. And it was a popular old time radio segment.
Very nice. I like old time radio. I like the theater of the mind kind of stuff. It's very clever.
I like Fibber McGee and Molly's Closet.
No, see, I don't know about their closet.
Oh, yeah. So Fibber McGee and Molly were another pair of old time radio characters. They were comedians. And they famously had a closet in their apartment that was stuffed full of junk. And every time they had to open the closet, all of the junk would come cascading out and make a huge clattering sound on the radio. And people could imagine them just being deluged by all of the junk that came out of the closet. And so frequently you would hear Molly say something like, "Don't open that door, McGee." And then there would be this huge clattering.
Yeah. Sound people had it good in those days.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of jobs for sound people. Darren looks all wistful. Yeah, those were the good old days for sound people. You're doing all right, Darren. You have any sound effects in there, Darren? You got like cheering or something, right? You got one sound effect. All right. I almost gave out the number. No number. Today is weird questions for Jimmy Akin, and here's a weird.
You know what sound people were called back then?
I feel like I do know, but now I can't get it. What is it?
They were called, so they made sound effects instead of visual effects, and the making of sound effects was known as Foley. So they were known as Foley artists.
Foley artists. They're still Foley artists today, but I think a lot of their work might be done electronically. I don't know. A lot of Because there's nothing natural in the sound of like a transformer transforming, but somebody's got to come up with the sounds for it.
I remember watching a segment on Mystery Science Theater 3000 once where Joel Robinson was demonstrating imaginative Foley techniques and to simulate the sound of horses' hooves running instead of clapping coconuts together, coconut halves, which is the classic way of doing horses' hooves. He proposed taking a bunch of hamsters and putting them in a drum head over a microphone and sloshing them around.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. All right. Here's another weird question for you, Jimmy. Suppose Middle Earth really existed. Could God become incarnate as a man, an elf, a dwarf, and a hobbit all at the same time? If yes, could man, elf, dwarf, and hobbit Jesus interact with each other and maybe all go out for a pint?
So people, because of how unique Jesus is, people often think of Jesus as if he were the only incarnation God could do. But that doesn't really make sense in terms of God's omnipotence. Omnipotence is the ability to actualize any logically possible state of affairs. And so if you want to say God can't do something, you're going to need to be able to find a contradiction in the terms, where one set of terms logically contradicts another. Like God can't make a four-sided triangle because triangles by definition have three sides. So the idea of a four-sided triangle would be a contradiction in terms. Well, the idea of the incarnation is God has a divine nature, and then he assumes a human nature onto that. Well, there's nothing contradictory with the idea of assuming a nature. And if you have infinite capabilities like God does, there's no reason you couldn't assume a second nature and a third nature and a fourth nature, or any number of natures. And so I don't see any reason, given that he's omnipotent, why God couldn't assume any number of different natures, including man, elf, dwarf, and hobbit, assuming those are different species. I don't know that they are. I don't know that they really have different natures, but supposing they do, God is omnipotent. He can do what he chooses. And so I don't see any reason he couldn't choose to do that. Also, there's no contradiction in the idea of different incarnations of Jesus interacting with each other. And therefore, I would assume that they could. It would be within the power of omnipotence for different divine incarnations to interact with each other, including at a pub.
Where you would get a pint. Jacob, thanks very much. Very, very good. Weird question. Fit perfectly. This one comes from Anonymous. I'm a bit of a survivalist nut, and I am always preparing for the collapse of civilization.
As you do.
As one does.
Yeah.
I was wondering if there was a nuclear war or really any kind of catastrophe that would trigger a societal collapse, and the chaos was so widespread that most of the bishops and all of the cardinals were killed, how would the new pope be elected? Could the surviving bishops, who I would imagine would not be cardinals because most likely they'd all be remote rural bishops, elect the new pope? Furthermore, what if all the bishops were killed? Could regular priests somehow advance one of their own to the bishopric? If not, could they at least lay their hands on lay people and continue apostolic succession in that way?
Okay, so any kind of societal collapse that would kill the entire College of Cardinals is very hard to imagine. So this is not going to happen. But for the sake of exploring it, let's propose something that could actually do what you need functionally to create this kind of situation. Let's suppose the Pope has died, and so we're in a seat of vacant period, and the entire voting body of the College of Cardinals has gathered in Rome to elect a new pope. So you've got all of the cardinals who are eligible to vote in Rome to do the election. And while the conclave is going on, someone drops a nuke on St. Peter's and they all die. So you now have no voting age cardinals left in the world. That's the most realistic scenario for, something that would kill a conclave while it's meeting. That's the most realistic scenario to get into this kind of situation. What would happen? Well, the way the apostolic constitutions are written that govern conclaves, there's no provision for that. I think there should be. I think they should create an act of God provision where here's what happens if the whole college is taken down at once. But thus far, they haven't done that. So we're dealing with a praetor legem, or outside of the law situation. What would happen in the real world is not that the bishops of the world in general would elect the new pope. Instead, the duty, even though it's not provided for in the law, the duty would logically fall on the ineligible cardinals, those who are past 80 years of age, because they're not required to come to Rome for the conclave. They can, and they can give their opinions, but they don't have a vote. And so the surviving cardinals elsewhere in the world that were not eligible to vote in the conclave would then be called upon to elect a new pope. And they might not elect one of their own number because they're all over the age of 80. And so they might want to say, well, let's pick a bishop who's under the age of 80, because you don't want a super short-reigned pope. He's going to have a lot on his plate, like appointing an entirely new college of cardinals. Now, suppose someone really wanted to do in the church, and so not only did they drop a nuke on the Sistine Chapel, they also dispatched assassins to kill all of the cardinals who were ineligible to vote. So they all get wiped out too, and now we have no cardinals left in the world. Again, we're in a praetor legem situation, but cardinals and the College of Cardinals is not an institution of divine law. Therefore, in emergency situations, you can make other provisions, even though it's not what the law currently provides for. If it's impossible to fulfill the current law, then you can at least pro tem for the moment deviate from the law in order to do what you need to accomplish. And so then it would be possible for bishops to elect the new pope. And that would be the solution that would be arrived at. Suppose, though, that someone just hated all bishops in the world and had unlimited resources. So, Elon Musk goes super anti-episcopal, or George Soros goes super anti-episcopal, and dispatches assassins to kill every bishop in the world. What would happen then? How would we not only get a new pope, but how would we get new bishops going forward? Well, this is an open question. It depends on the nature of holy orders. But what I can tell you is there are cases in history where popes have authorized priests to ordain other priests. And like the head of an abbey, for example, might ordain one of his own priests. And so there are cases in history where popes have authorized priests to do ordinations without a bishop, and those ordinations have been treated as valid. Now, you could say, but there's only a few of these, and maybe they were mistakes, and we have a better understanding now, and you have to have a bishop to do a valid ordination. But you could also look at it the other way and say, okay, it looks like sacramental abilities, the ability to do all 7 sacraments, is tied to the office of priest. And bishops may have some additional functions like jurisdiction that they inherit natively from their episcopal consecration, but the ability to do the episcopal consecration sacramentally is part of the office of priest. And so in that case, you could have priests elect new bishops and continue apostolic succession that way.
Wow. I'm really glad we got that question. Thank you very, very much for the question. I got time to do another one here before we got to go. It's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. This one comes from Martin. When the Magi came, do you think it made the Holy Family wealthy? For example, enough to travel and stay in Egypt, provide for a 3-year ministry of 13 plus, and for the care of his beloved mother Mary until the Dormition?
No, I don't think it's likely. The reason I say that is that I think that the gifts, including gold, that the Magi gave, and the other gifts, the frankincense and myrrh, were valuable substances that could be resold. I think the funding from that likely helped pay for the Holy Family's flight to Egypt, but I don't think it made the family wealthy, because if you were wealthy, you didn't work a trade. And Joseph and Jesus are clearly tradesmen. They're in later life. They worked as, in Greek, the word is tekton. It could be translated builder or craftsman or things like that, but they worked with their hands, so they weren't wealthy. And in fact, we have records from the 2nd century of people in Palestine who had things that Jesus and Joseph had made, including, harnesses for animals and things like that, the yokes that you would use to plow with. And so that's evidence that they weren't made permanently wealthy. Also, regarding Jesus's ministry, Luke 8:3 refers to a group of women who Luke says ministered out of their substance to Jesus and the apostles, meaning they supported them financially. And so they were taking in donations to support Jesus's ministry. He wasn't independently wealthy.
Martin, thank you very much for that question. Lots of great questions so far. Lots more great ones to come, because it's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin, both hours today. Lots of weird questions right after this with Jimmy on Catholic Answers Live.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity in The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com, or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Are you ready to defend your faith in a world of unbelief? Join us at the 9th Annual Catholic Answers Apologetics Conference. This year's theme, I Believe in God, and it'll help you provide clear and charitable answers to atheism, agnosticism, and plain old indifference. Don't miss what promises to be the event of the season. Join us in San Diego from September 21st through 24th as we welcome our special guest, Dr. Scott Hahn, and an all-star lineup of great Catholic speakers. Spend quality time with your favorite Catholic Answers apologists and enjoy 4 days of fun, fellowship, and adoration of the Almighty. Seats are still available, but they're going fast. Visit CatholicAnswersConference.com or call 888-291-8000 to register. Enter promo code EARLY and save $50. That's CatholicAnswersConference.com.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest, which is an awful good thing because it's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin this hour. Every now and then we get the opportunity on a Friday usually on a Friday afternoon, to get to do Weird Questions with Jimmy, and we like it an awful lot. And so now it has become a thing, and people send us their weird questions. Some of them weird in a kind of secular way. Some of them weird in a kind of more faith-based way, but all of them interesting. And this one comes from Aaron. Where does the idea of toll booths come from? And why didn't it make its way into the Western Church?
Okay, so the toll booths that we're talking about here aren't things that you would find on a turnpike here on Earth. They're what are known as aerial toll booths. And so the idea is that as a departed soul is escorted to be with God in heaven, it's taken by an angel, and it encounters various way stations or toll booths in the sky on its way to heaven. And these toll booths are inhabited by demons. And the demons will accuse the soul of various sins. So there's like a toll booth for lust, and a toll booth for theft, and a toll booth for lying, and things like that. And if a person has been guilty of these sins, the demons will accuse it and try to take it to hell. But if the person has been redeemed and is in God's grace and loves God, then it's not afraid of these accusations, and it will not go to hell. It'll be escorted on by the attending angel and eventually make its way to God. And this idea seems to be this way. What this is essentially a way of picturing what happens in the afterlife as a soul makes its way to God. And the imagery that this way of depicting it is used seems to have a number of sources. One of the sources may be the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, where Jesus refers to angels taking the soul of Lazarus to be in Abraham's bosom. And so that's a possible source for the idea of angels escorting you to your destination in the afterlife. Then since we imagine God as being in heaven, in the highest heaven, if you want to imagine going from earth to the highest heaven, you're going to have to go through the atmosphere. And the atmosphere in a lot of Second Temple Jewish and early Christian literature is depicted as the realm of demons. The idea is once you get into the supralunary world beyond where the moon is, you're in the different heavens. Often they're numbered as 7. You see this, for example, in the early Christian document, The Ascension of Isaiah, which was written about AD 67. So it's actually older than the book of Revelation is. But it has 7 heavens. And then underneath the first heaven is the atmosphere. And in the atmosphere, you've got all these demons fighting each other. But then once you get into the heavens, they're inhabited by different grades of angels. And you even find references in St. Paul to the devil as the prince of the power of the air. So the idea that the atmosphere is inhabited by demons is something that is already present in Second Temple Jewish and early Christian literature. And that's probably what the Ascension of Isaiah is drawing on, is that stream of thought, and maybe even St. Paul himself for that idea. So if you're imagining how would a soul get to God way up in heaven, it's going to pass through the atmosphere. It may encounter demons. They may accuse it of sins because demons are into doing that. But if you're in a state of grace, if you love God, you're going to get through it okay. There's also another possible source that occurs to me, because one of the earliest references to the toll house concept is in the life of St. Anthony the Great. And it was written by St. Athanasius. So St. Athanasius lives in the early 300s. Anthony is a little bit prior to him. I believe they were contemporaries, but Anthony is from an earlier generation. And both of them are in Egypt. St. Athanasius was Patriarch of Alexandria. St. Anthony the Great lived in the desert in Egypt. And that means we need to ask the question whether Egyptian iconography might have had an influence on how Egyptian Christians were picturing things in the afterlife, because we all draw on our cultural background when we are imagining what the afterlife is going to be like. And if you study ancient Egyptian religion, you find out that they had a very interesting and frightening understanding of what happens in the afterlife. They basically thought that the soul of the dead is going to be escorted through a series of different obstacles on its way to the gods, and that at these obstacles there were terrifying monsters that would threaten, among other things, to devour the soul. In fact, there's one beast that you were expected to encounter known as the devourer of souls that would, if your soul weighs weighs more than a feather, if it's burdened down by sins, then the devourer of souls will simply eat you up and you'll go out of existence. So they imagined this terrifying series of encounters with supernatural beings on the journey in the afterlife. And that's similar enough to the Toll House concept. I wonder if that may not have had a role in shaping us. And by the way, the reason we know about this Egyptian conception of the afterlife is because of what are known as the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, and the books of the dead. Originally, to guide Pharaoh's soul to the afterlife, they would depict this afterlife journey on the walls of pyramids, including rituals. Now, they're called spells, but really they're rituals. Rituals that Pharaoh could use to get through each of these obstacles. And then, periodically, the government of Egypt would fall apart, and we would have what are known as the intermediate periods where there wasn't a stable centralized government in Egypt. And during those periods, the pyramids were looted. And so people went into the temples and saw the pyramid texts, and they said, Pharaoh's got special sauce to help you get to the afterlife, to get to the gods successfully. I want that too. And so that led to the development of what are known as the coffin texts, where they would take the pyramid texts that were, engraved on the walls of the pyramids and put them on the coffin, on the sarcophagus that a person's buried in. And so you'd be laying in your coffin, you'd have access to all the rituals you needed. Well, that was fine, but coffins are only so big, so you couldn't really fit all of the rituals on them. And so that led to the development of the Book of the Dead. The Book of the Dead is a scroll and Book of the Dead just means book owned by a dead person. And so they would write all the rituals to help you get through the obstacle course in the afterlife on a scroll, and they'd bury the scroll with you, and the scroll could be as long as you need to fit all the rituals on it. And so so this was part of the Egyptian religious imagination. I did an episode of Mysterious World earlier this year where I interviewed the Egyptologist Dr. Bob Breyer about the Egyptian concept of the afterlife, including all the material I've just covered. And I can't help but wondering if this didn't have an influence on the way Egyptian Christians, like Anthony the Great and St. Athanasius, depicted the soul's journey in the afterlife. So it's another possible source. As to the reason why this didn't become popular in the Western Church, it's because we had a different way of envisioning what happens to the soul, and that is purgatory. But basically, both processes, both ways of imagining the soul in the afterlife, imagine that it undertakes a journey to get to God, a series of stages that it passes through. And in the Eastern conception, it moves through the atmosphere for those different stages, whereas in the Western purgatorial conception, it doesn't imagine the soul moving from place to place, but it imagines the soul being progressively purified as a series of stages that peel away things that would hold it back from being with God. And eventually, in both processes, it ends up with God. And so so we do have an equivalent concept to the toll houses, but we use different iconography, different imagery to depict that. And I think that's perfectly legitimate to do. You don't have to picture things the same way. Our minds are not presently configured to understand and process the afterlife. So any information we get about the afterlife and the invisible world around us is accommodated to the perspective of living human beings. It's pictured in ways that we can understand. So that's why biblical prophets, for example, picture the afterlife as a wedding banquet, or as having streets made of transparent gold or things like that. Those images aren't literally true, but they're meant to give us a sense of what this is like. And there are other ways of picturing the journey of the soul in the afterlife. Coming up at the end of July on Mysterious World, I'm going to have an interview with a Dominican friar, Father Nathan Castle, who has a special ministry to souls in purgatory. And what happens is he reports getting dreams of people who died, usually in traumatic ways. And then he and a prayer partner have a prayer session where they try to offer those souls counseling to help them move on in the afterlife and let go of whatever is holding them back from making spiritual progress. And he's got some very picturesque ways of imagining what's happening with these souls. I don't see anything, problematic in that in and of itself. There are different ways of picturing the afterlife. Undoubtedly, to my mind, the afterlife is more complex than we can understand at present. And therefore, all of these toll houses, purgatory, Father Castle's dreams, they're all compacted down and simplified so that we can understand them. But the reality of what's happening should transcend all of them and be even more amazing.
Aaron, what a great question. Thank you so much for that. It's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin today. We do have to take a break. We'll be right back with more weird questions right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Do you love praying for people? Have you ever wanted to use your gift of prayer to share Jesus with others and build up the body of Christ? Start a public prayer station with St. Paul Street Evangelization. Listen to people's needs, pray with them, or invite them to meet you at church. St. Paul Street Evangelization can help you get started. Find out how at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
Hosting Women Made New has helped me deepen my own faith, and I look forward to every weekend having those in-depth discussions with my guests. It's been such a blessing being a part of the EWTN family and carry on the mission that Mother Angelica started.
Women Made New, Saturday noon Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Very grateful for Aaron's question. That was fascinating conversation about the afterlife. Thank you, Aaron, very much for that. It's weird questions for Jimmy Akin, and sometimes the questions get really weird, and all you can do is hang on to find out what's coming next. This is from Joe. Jimmy. Joe wants to know: are the laws of logic and thought, identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle true of all possible universes or only ours? Would multiverse theories or alternate dimensions modify these rules? And do the laws certainly apply even here? Or could one argue that maybe an extreme form of Scotistic...
There you go.
Haecceity. But thanks a lot.
Haecceity.
Haecceity. Thanks, Joe. Versus quiddity mean that maybe they don't. I'm so mad at Joe right now. I'm so mad at Joe.
It's just three words: Scotistic, haecceity, and quiddity.
Yeah,
but I acknowledge they are not overly familiar terms to non-philosophers and may be hard to pronounce.
I should have read ahead. I should have maybe practiced a little bit. Thanks, Joe.
Okay, so I think there can be things that are different about different universes. Like our universe has 3 spatial dimensions and 1 temporal dimension, at least as far as we know. Those are the ones that manifest and are obvious to us in this universe. But I can imagine other universes that have different numbers of physical dimensions. There's a famous book from a little more than 100 years ago by Edwin Abbott called Flatland, and it is a really, really good book. The full title is like Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions. And romance in this sense is is what they used to call a novel. A novel was a romance. It didn't mean what we would think of as a romance. And so in Flatland, it's about a world called Flatland that has two physical dimensions. So it's like the flat surface of a table, and a sphere from a third dimensional world visits Flatland and is able to use its three-dimensionality to accomplish effects that look like miracles from a two-dimensional perspective. Like, for example, at one point the sphere passes through the plane of Flatland. So to a Flatlander, it looks like there's a little dot there, and then it grows into a big circle, and then it shrinks away again to a dot and vanishes. Since he's floating over the plane of Flatland, the sphere can also see inside of the Flatlanders and inside of their houses and tell them what's going on. So to them, it's like remote viewing. It's got preternatural knowledge of hidden things.
Right.
And it can even pick up a Flatlander and move him from one place to another and drop him back down into Flatland. So it's like you got your friend here, poof, he's gone, and poof, he's over there now. And the sphere convinces one of the Flatlanders, a gentleman named A Square, to go and preach the gospel of the three dimensions. And so the Square does, which then gets him in trouble with the circular priests of Flatland, because the gospel of the three dimensions is viewed as heresy. And they're about to execute the Square when the sphere swoops in and snatches him up out of the plane of Flatland and rescues him. The sphere also takes him to a one-dimensional world called Lineland, where everybody is a line segment. So he gets to see what's a world that's even lower in its dimensionality than Flatland is. And what all this is doing is setting us up for thinking about a universe that has more than just the three dimensions that we experience. If there is a four-dimensional world, then an inhabitant of the four-dimensional world could visit our three-dimensional world and do the same miraculous seeming things that the sphere was able to do with the two-dimensional world. And so you've got some fascinating, geometry and science and religion and social parody all going on in this novel. And so I can imagine universes that have more or less numbers of dimensions. I can also imagine universes that have different constants of nature, like maybe the force of gravity is stronger or weaker, or maybe the electromagnetic force is stronger or weaker. But what I can't imagine is universes that involve logical contradictions. And so I think that the laws of logic that Joe asks about, like the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, the law of the excluded middle, those are basic principles that I think are going to apply to all worlds. Every possible world is defined in terms of what's logically possible. And so I think the laws of logic are going to apply to every world. Another way of looking at that would be to say, well, God is omnipotent, so God can make anything logically possible. So all of the universes that God could make are the ones that are logically possible. And that means that the laws of logic are going to apply to every universe. Because if they didn't, the universe would not be logically possible and God couldn't make it. So God could not make a universe with four-sided triangles in it. But I think the fundamental laws of logic, therefore, will apply to every universe. But there may be subtleties to how the laws work that we haven't perceived yet. Because logic grows over time, and our understanding of it grows over time. And some people have proposed that, okay, maybe we need to qualify the law of non-contradiction to account for the superstates that are proposed in quantum mechanics. Okay, well, that's fine. You could have a more sophisticated understanding of the law of non-contradiction, but fundamentally, the law of non-contradiction is still going to apply, even if it doesn't apply in the naive way that's always been assumed. It still corresponds to a truth, even if you need to understand it in a more nuanced way.
Joe, I'm not really mad at you. Thanks very much for that question. Appreciate it very much. I want to get to this one, though, because this I can read with no difficulty, and
it involves food,
and it produces some anxiety in me as well, because I really want to know the answer. Andy asks, why is most lunch meat round when bread is mostly square?
Okay, so lunch meat, which historically would be it's all different. Historically, it's all been different varieties of sausage. You know, I mean, bologna is a type of sausage. Salami is a type of sausage. Fundamentally, you've got sausage as the principal thing you put in sandwiches to make sandwiches. But sausage precedes sandwiches. We've had sausage a lot longer than we've had sandwiches. It also precedes modern loaves of bread. Flatbreads go into antiquity. So you'd have people with like pita bread in the ancient Near East, but they didn't have what we would think of as a loaf of bread. So how did we get sandwiches? Well, reportedly, the sandwich was invented by the 4th Earl of Sandwich in England. His name was John Montague, and he allegedly invented the sandwich, or had his servants invent the sandwich, as a way for him to take a quick bite to eat while he was gambling. Because before the internet, rich people passed time by gambling. And so he's having his gambling sessions. He's playing cards with people. He doesn't want to take time for a full meal. So he has the servants go cut off a piece of sausage and put it between 2 pieces of bread to keep his fingers clean, and he eats the sandwich. And since he was the Earl of Sandwich, this hand meal, came to be known as a sandwich. Well, so they were using pre-existing materials to make the sandwich. So we need to figure out why the lunch meat is round and the bread is square. We need to think about, well, what was the origin of these things before they got put together in a sandwich? And the answer is sausage historically has been made from some kind of ground meat being put into a casing. And the casing that people would use, since waste not, want not, was the intestines of an animal. So like you would take pork and grind it up really fine and then shove it into a pig intestine, and that's how you would make sausage. Well, intestines are round, and an intestine is basically a long round tube. And so that's why sausage, and thus lunch meat, tends to be round, because historically the molding that it was put into was a round intestine. What about bread? Well, like I said, originally, flatbread goes way back, but at some point after, you would have bread made in molds, and the square shape or cubic shape, rectangular shape, is the most efficient space filling shape there is. You can see how it's more efficient than an intestine, for example. You could, if you think about packing a bunch of rectangles into a space versus packing a bunch of cylinders into a space, you will more efficiently fill the space by packing rectangles into it than by packing cylinders into it. And so the square pan or rectangular pan was a more efficient shape for making a mold that you could pour your bread dough into. And so that's why bread ends up being square, because it's made in rectangular pans, whereas sausage is made historically in intestinal casings, and so that's why it's round. Incidentally, you may have heard the expression, the greatest thing since sliced bread. Yeah. And people don't realize this, but sliced bread is a new thing. Bread originally, it came in loaves and you'd have to cut it yourself. But in 1928, an American baker started manufacturing bread that came pre-sliced and putting it in, bags of bread. It was so convenient. Housewives didn't have to cut their own bread anymore. It was great. And that's led to the expression, the greatest thing since sliced bread came in 1928.
We're only 5 years away from the 100th anniversary of sliced bread. Now that I know about that, we will definitely have to celebrate that. I love foods named after the nobility. The sandwich named after the Earl of Sandwich. Of course, chocolate named after Count Chocula. Thanks very much, Andy, for that question. We got a lot more weird questions, though, Jimmy. Will you stay for another half hour?
I'll stay for a whole nother hour.
Oh, another? I don't know why I said a half hour. What is wrong with me today? All right, we'll do a whole hour. Not a half hour, a whole. I sliced the hour. We'll be right back with more weird questions with Jimmy Akin right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, here for a whole hour, not just a half hour, whole hour of weird questions for Jimmy Akin. Jimmy, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, but well known now as the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, and has a growing reputation over the years for being willing to answer and quite seriously some questions that other people don't have the ability to answer, but also just to have a lot of fun with them. Weird questions, mysterious questions, all that stuff. Jimmy,
or questions that others wouldn't take seriously. I try to answer seriously, no matter how strange the question is.
Yeah. And so that developed into this program, Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin, and also has been an important part of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, which you should check out over at mysterious.fm, or just type in Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. You'll find it. It's patrons' questions this week, and some of them are fantastic. The list that you gave us before, Jimmy, was enticing, to say the least. I mean, they come up with good questions.
It was meant to be.
Yeah, they know how to play the game. They come up with really good. These patrons, they come up with good questions. They're not wasting their shot.
No, and some of them get answers that may be different than what people are expecting. What I have to say about Ouija boards is not what most people would predict. I'm not a fan of Ouija boards, but if you look at the evidence, it does not correspond to a common conception about Ouija boards.
Oh, I would love to hear that. All right, I'll have to tune in for the. By the way, it's dropped already. You can get it at mysterious.fm right now, but don't get it for at least another hour, because we got Jimmy live with us doing weird questions.
Well, recorded live. Yes, I'm live at the time we're recording this.
Playing out live. That's what I meant. Playing out live. We're not just on podcast yet. Soon to be. Soon to be in the files. All right. So the Ouija board question, all kinds of interesting questions. That's the thing is, I think we have these weird questions because we live in a very strange world. We need somewhere to go. Somebody's going to answer them. Take them seriously. Look at the evidence of reason, the evidence of faith, all that. So I think that's why it's so popular. We've solved the lunch meat, round bread, square conundrum. This next question comes from Zane. Jimmy, he begins. Huge fan of your work, your terminal intellect, and your towering beard. Or maybe I got that backwards. That's funny, Zane.
He's referring to the fact I've grown my beard out to its terminal length. Hair on our bodies grows to a certain length and stops. And different hairs are programmed to grow to different lengths. That's why our eyebrows are the length they are, but hair on our scalp is much shorter than our eyebrows, and why the hair on our bare forehead, we do have hair there, but it is very short, and then hair on the back of our scalp is much longer. And if you're a man, the hair in your beard can be much longer, and I let mine grow out to its terminal length. So when he refers to my terminal intellect and towering beard, that's what he's referring to.
Is that a spoonerism?
It's a conceptual spoonerism.
Oh, yeah.
It's not a proper spoonerism. So there was a British clergyman named Reverend Spooner, and he was known for accidentally
What do we do? And one of the possibilities is we go to the universe to evangelize the rest of the universe, and we might incarnate then as aliens. So the last part of the question then, or if only Christ can do the incarnating, saving, would be, or are there already millions of incarnations of Christ and his form in heaven adjusted to whatever creature he is interacting with? That is a long and complex set of questions, but I leave it to you, Jimmy.
So we don't know what our missions in the afterlife are going to be. We're told that we will reign with Christ, but we don't know exactly what that's going to involve. We certainly don't know if our missions are going to be extraterrestrial in nature. They may just involve living eternal life and running the new earth. If we evangelize others, then, if we go to other planets to do evangelization, then we might or might not appear in their forms. We have some evidence that Jesus in his glorified state is able to change his form. And the evidence for that consists of when, for example, when he appears to the two disciples on the road to Emmaus and they don't recognize him. Now, personally, I don't think that the best understanding of that is he was in a different form, because it doesn't say he changed shape and then they recognized him. It just says they recognized him. And that suggests to me a different phenomenon, which is known as prosopagnosia. Prosopon is the Greek word for face, and gnosis is the word for knowledge. So prosopagnosia is not knowing a person's face. The in agnosia means not. So prosopagnosia means not knowing people's faces. And it's a real condition. It's also called face blindness, and it is a neurological issue that some people have where they can see you perfectly well, but their brain is just not associating your face with your identity. And it looks to me like what happened with the two disciples on the road to Emmaus is they had temporary induced prosopagnosia. And then when Jesus broke the bread, that condition was withdrawn and they were able to recognize him. But, he's also God, and God can do anything logically possible. So I think it's possible for Jesus to appear in other forms, to change shape, or at least create the impression that he's in a different form. And we're told that we're going to be like Jesus, not in every respect, but in many respects. So I think that we might be able to appear in other forms to alien beings. There's even evidence that in the afterlife, in the intermediate state, the human soul can appear in different forms. It can project different mental images to living people of what it looks like. And so that's why, for example, when you have an apparition of a saint or a ghost, the saint or the ghost can change its appearance. For example, dressing in old-fashioned clothing versus newer clothing or something like that. It's also possible that Christ might or might not incarnate as one of their species. We talked about how last hour if omnipotence allows God to assume an additional nature, like he's assumed human nature. Well, if Klingons were real, he could also assume a Klingon nature and redeem Klingons as a Klingon. But he may not do it that way. Aquinas talks about how God could have redeemed us in any number of different ways. He chose to use Christ's death in human form on earth to redeem us, but he might redeem aliens in some other way. Or he might not. He might choose to redeem them through an incarnation of Christ in their species, or he might choose to redeem them through Christ's incarnation as a human. In which case the infinite effects of his death might be applied to them as well for redemption. If there are other incarnations of Christ, then some of them may have already ascended to heaven, and so I don't see any reason that divine omnipotence couldn't have multiple incarnations of Christ in heaven at the same time, if that's what God chose. What I don't know is what choices God has made.
That was a long, complex question, Zane. I hope you were satisfied with the answer. I appreciate the question. It's weird questions with Jimmy Akin today. Well, it's time for the break, so we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more weird questions for Jimmy right after this.
Your questions, Catholic Answers, live.
Experience the incredible story of the woman who Time magazine named the most influential Catholic woman in the United States. Born Rita Rizzo, the future Mother Angelica grew up in a rough neighborhood in Canton, Ohio. Young Rita experienced abandonment, rejection, and heartache, but God touched her through a woman named Rhoda Wise. Encounter this amazing woman at the Mother Angelica Museum. Plan your visit today at motherangelicamuseum.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Hi, this is H. McKay. Join me for our weekly look at some of the best Catholic webcasts from across America. Catholics Coast to Coast, your chance to get a sample of some of the great podcasts we have available at EWTNradio.net, and to encourage you in your walk with God and your Catholic faith. Log in to EWTNradio.net, and at Podcast Central is where you can find great shows. Catholics Coast to Coast, Sunday night, 6 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and it's weird questions for Jimmy Akin. We got a whole bunch of weird questions for Jimmy. People think of the wildest things. Many of them I never would have thought of, and I find that a lot of fun to get to hear these wild questions. Here's a good one from Chris. Chris wants to know, Jimmy, why did humans take so long to be advanced just recently with agriculture, medicine, economy, infrastructure? What were we doing for 200,000 years?
Well, we were trying to survive, and that wasn't easy when you're not in a developed civilization. You're in a small tribal group, and you don't have advanced technology, you don't have advanced medicine, you don't have advanced food production. All of those things began to happen after in the Neolithic age with the agricultural revolution. And that introduced a lot more specialization of labor into human communities where before maybe you had a leader and a priest or shaman in your tribe, and they had some specialized labor, but most people, they all had the same job, being a hunter-gatherer. It might be a different set of duties for a man than for a woman, but basically there's one career path open to almost everybody. And so you couldn't go to a specialist to deal with a lot of things. You didn't have specialist teachers to teach your children for you. You didn't have specialist auto mechanics because you didn't have automobiles. And so everybody had the basic knowledge they needed to do their job and not much more. And so they also didn't have any way of passing on information except orally, person to person. So if you're going to train somebody in here's how you be a hunter-gatherer, you could train your kids in how to do that, but it's not like you could write it down. And so if you had some extra knowledge besides just how to be a hunter-gatherer, you didn't have any way to pass it on except orally. So there's a very low bandwidth of communication. After the invention of writing, which only occurred about 5,000 years ago, you could write down information and it could live on after you. And that information could go and spread more widely. But until you had writing, you couldn't do that. All learning required person-to-person contact. And given the difficulties of survival, that and the difficulties of communicating and building storehouses of knowledge, those are key reasons why humanity's development was so slow in the beginning, because life was so tough just to survive, and there was no easy way to pass on information except by conversation one-to-one. There's also another possible factor, which is as human societies have grown more complex, and there may be different reasons for this, but as human societies have grown more complex, our intellects have needed to also become more complex to deal with the greater social complexity. And so there is evidence that human intelligence has been rising over the last few thousand years, and it's quite possible that there may have been some notable upgrades in human intelligence within the last few tens of thousands of years. And they continue today. We're undoubtedly or very likely to be smarter than our ancestors 4,000 years ago were. Now, that would also be another reason why progress was so slow in the beginning if humans weren't as smart as they are now. So as the complexity of society increases, the human intellect also increases, and that accelerates the rate of change and the rate of technological advancement. So you have kind of a feedback loop, a virtuous circle that drives us towards accelerating improvements compared to what was happening in 100,000 years ago.
Chris, that was a fantastic question. Thank you very much for that weird question. Maybe the best name of the hour, Molecat, asks this, or maybe Molcat. With admission by the USA of UFOs, what do we think about extraterrestrial beings, souls, evangelizing, origins, etc.? First of all, Molecat, you should watch a show called Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World.
Well, and specifically, they should listen to episode 55, which is where I go into all those questions. The answer is we don't have, the church doesn't have teachings on these questions. It's open to the existence of extraterrestrial life. And if there are intelligent aliens, then they would have rational souls the same way we do. They might or might not be fallen. If they might or might not need evangelization, they would be God's other children. They would just be additional people he made elsewhere. But we don't know anything about them, or even if they exist. So there are a lot of possibilities about, do they need evangelization? Can you baptize them? Which sacraments can you give them? And it can depend on their biology. Let's suppose they have 3 sexes instead of 2, and you need all 3 sexes to breed. They might have 3-person marriages. Or let's suppose they're monosexual and a single organism in their species can reproduce by mitosis. It can just kind of split itself in 2 and then regrow from there. Well, that species might not have marriage at all. And so there are a lot of possibilities. And if you want to hear an exploration of them, check out episode 55 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. You can get to it by going to mysterious.fm/55.
And thank you very much for that question. Appreciate it, Molecat. No asks
Noah.
That's Noah?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I think about the doctrine of divine simplicity and the afterlife. If God is not made of any parts, what are we going to see when in heaven? Or what is he going to reveal to us if he is so simple?
Okay, so we often talk about heaven as involving the beatific vision of God. Beatific means happy. So we're going to have a happy vision of God. At least that's how heaven is pictured. But what kind of vision are we talking about? Well, God doesn't have a physical body apart from the incarnation. So there's nothing there physically to see. So when theologians talk about the beatific vision, what they are imagining is not literal physical vision where photons come into your eyes and get translated by your retina and nerve system in your brain. It's not physical vision, it's spiritual insight. So this is an intellectual vision where you perceive God's nature. And it may or may not involve picturing something. It may be a pure spiritual insight that does not involve any imagery. You just have an intense understanding of God and his perfection. On the other hand, though, it is possible that there might be imagery associated with this, in which case it would be we'd see whatever God wants us to see. God has used visions in which he appeared to have human form, and that means parts, so a hand and a face and things like that. For example, in the book of Daniel, Daniel sees the Ancient of Days. He sees God seated on a throne in heaven, and he would have seen him as a majestic king, and so it's possible that we might see, presumably with white hair, since he's described as the Ancient of Days. So he presumably, it's suggesting he's very old, and so that would be presumably represented by white hair and a white beard. And that's the image that God chose to give Daniel, to enable Daniel to visualize him. And God could do something similar with us, but he doesn't literally have parts because he doesn't literally have a physical body apart from the incarnation. And what we would see might involve parts, but it would just be a representation to help facilitate our interaction with God.
Thanks very much for that question, Noah. Appreciate it. I think I got time. I'm just checking the clock here. I'm going to do Susanna's question. We'll see. I think we can get through it. I heard that Lucifer's rebellion was that God revealed the incarnation of the Son, for which he refused to serve a man. Does that mean it wasn't revealed that God is Trinitarian? I'm assuming that because God is omnipresent, the Son is God and is man.
Well, it's true that the Son is both God and man. It's not because God is omnipresent. It's because the Son chose to incarnate as a man. If it was because of omnipresence, then we would all be Jesus because he's everywhere. And it's not the case. Not every human being is Jesus. There is a unique relationship between Jesus's divinity and Jesus's humanity as opposed to your or my humanity. So it's the incarnation as a human, not omnipresence, that makes Jesus both God and man. The Trinitarian nature of God was presumably revealed to those in heaven, so presumably the angels, including the devil, knew about it. According to the story that you sometimes hear, and this is only one story, but according to the story you sometimes hear, the devil refused to serve because Jesus would add a human nature to his divine nature. And the devil, in his pride, regarded that as human nature as too lowly. And so he didn't want to give worship to Jesus through this lowly human nature. But I have to say, we're not told why the devil fell. Mm-hmm. It does not say that anywhere in Scripture. There have been different speculations about why the devil fell, but they are all just speculations. And so I wouldn't take any of them as the definitive truth.
That's a very fine question, Susanna. Appreciate that. It's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin this hour. We got just a second before we'll take a quick break, then we'll come back with lots more questions for you. I wanted to invite you to our National Apologetics Conference. This year's topic is I Believe in God. It runs from September 21st to 24th right here in San Diego. And you can find out all about it at CatholicAnswersConference.com. We've got a great price for you. And we have wonderful guests. Dr. Scott Hahn is going to be there. Sister Regina Marie Gorman is going to be our keynote speaker. Jimmy will be there, as with all of our apologists. We'll do the radio show. It's just a lot of fun. Very educational opportunity. And this time, a chance to meditate on God and get better at explaining God to a world that's less and less interested in God. CatholicAnswersConference.com. This year, the Catholic Answers Conference turns its attention to the question of God in an age of unbelief. Join us September 21st through 24th in San Diego for I Believe in God, featuring very special guest, Scott Hahn, and an all-star lineup of speakers. Spend 4 fun days with your favorite Catholic Answers apologists. Seats are still available, but going fast. Use promo code EARLY to save $50 and register today at CatholicAnswersConference.com.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
As Catholic apologetics have gotten stronger, Protestant responses have gotten stronger as well. And now they have their own answers to rebut the standard Catholic proofs. Don't fret, we've got you covered. In his new book, Meeting the Protestant Response, apologist Carlo Broussard gives well-reasoned biblical answers to Protestant comebacks. Order your copy of Meeting the Protestant Response today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. It's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. Always just a great way to spend a Friday afternoon. I think we mostly do it on Fridays. Maybe have done it a different day a few times, but mostly we've done it on Fridays. And Nicole is in the spirit. As a matter of fact, I really appreciate this question because it may not be one that's top of mind, but when I read it, I thought, I want to know the answer to that. Nicole asks, what are your thoughts on spontaneous human combustion? Is there evidence it's happened, or what would be a possible explanation for it?
So spontaneous human combustion is a phenomenon that's been reported, and there are cases where someone mysteriously caught fire and burned up. Typically, they were alone, and when people found their remains, it would, they would be charred, and oddly, the furniture, none of the furniture around them may have been burned up. It didn't burn up the entire room, just the person. And some of their body parts might still be there and not burned, like their feet or something would be left over and not be burned. So it's a mysterious phenomenon. The question is what causes it? And I think that we have a good explanation for at least most of the cases of spontaneous human combustion. First of all, there are a set of factors that tend to characterize the majority of the cases. The majority of the cases will tend to have three prominent factors, and there will usually be at least two of them in a given case. One of the factors is old age. A lot of the people this happens to are old. Another is alcohol consumption. A lot of the people this has happened to had been consuming alcohol. And a third thing that applies to many of these cases is smoking. They also were smokers. And you put those together and, okay, so if you're elderly, you may have mobility issues. You may not be able to just get up and run away and so forth. If you have an accident while smoking. Similarly, if you've been drinking alcohol, you may be out of it. You may not be aware when you have an accident smoking, and you may not be conscious, or you may just be on the edge of consciousness when it happens. And it could be that you've been drinking, you go unconscious first, and then you drop your cigarette or your cigar or your pipe, and your clothing catches fire, and you're out of it. You're unconscious, so you don't run away. And then what happens is, I hate to put it this way, but then you become a human candle. If you think about how candles work, they have a wick, which is the thing that burns, and the wick is driven by the wax in the candle. And wax is a kind of fat. Essentially, wax is a fat that's fully solid at room temperature. And so that feeds into the wick and burns. And eventually, and because of how candles work, if you think about it, you light a candle, it's going to consume the wax, but it's not going to catch the whole room on fire. It's just the candle itself will burn, but not everything around it. Oh. And so you essentially become a human candle, whether you're disabled through old age and or alcohol, and then you have a smoking accident, and your clothing becomes the wick, and your body fat becomes the wax, the fuel for the fire. And over a period of hours, just like a candle can burn for hours, you burn like a candle without catching the entire room on fire. And maybe little lower parts of you, like your feet, get left. But that seems to explain the majority of cases of so-called spontaneous human combustion. It only appears spontaneous because of nobody's there to see it start, because the person who is there dies. But that seems to explain most of these cases. Having said that, there are also reports of some cases where an obscure chemical process or metabolic process within the human body heats a person up unreasonably and might even lead to spontaneous human combustion. So it could be related to obscure chemical processes in the body in some cases, but that has yet to be scientifically confirmed. So I think the old age smoking alcohol trio is responsible for most cases, but there may be some cases with unusual metabolic processes involved as well. If you'd like to hear more about all that, check out episode 149 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World on spontaneous human combustion by going to mysterious.fm/149.
Nicole, thank you very much for that question. What show would be complete without a spontaneous human combustion question? It's weird questions for Jimmy Akin this hour. This one comes from Steve. What's the evidence that humans matured earlier in life in Christ's time?
Well, it's going to depend on what you mean by matured. Are we talking about social maturity or biological maturity? It may be the case that we mature biologically more quickly today, and that would be due to better diet and nutrition. On the other hand, people in the past did mature more socially, more quickly than we do today. The modern institution of being a teenager, where you're kind of in this in-between time for a number of years between childhood and adulthood, that is a new thing. People in the past were either children or adults, and they didn't have this lengthy quasi-adult period where they didn't have the responsibilities or options of adults. And so as to why people would mature socially more quickly in the past, I would say it was a combination of reasons. One of them is life was much harder. So people needed to go to work and do stuff at earlier ages, and that accepting of responsibility, having responsibility thrust on them sooner, made them grow up faster. We didn't have this long period where they could just laze around their parents' house, not really contributing, and being irresponsible and playing video games instead of going to work. Also getting education, but you didn't need as much education back then to have a job. So you could end up being functionally an adult at an earlier age. Your parents weren't going to let you lay around the house playing video games, because video games didn't exist, but they weren't going to let you lay around the house playing card games because people did have games in the past. And you were expected to go to work and assume responsibility and get out of your parents' house and become an adult, or not get out of your parents' house and become an adult in cultures where they had extended families. But one way or another, you were expected to assume more responsibility earlier in life than you are now.
Thanks very much, Steve. Appreciate that question. I think that brings us right about to the break. So we'll take this break and we'll be right back with more weird questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
St. John Paul II stated that, for the disciple of Christ, evangelization is a duty, an obligation of love, and the Catechism of the Catholic Church states that evangelization is necessary for salvation.
So we know we're called, but how do we do it?
St. Paul Street Evangelization can help. To learn more, contact us at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
EWTN, teaching the truth.
I really can't get enough Catholic teaching now that I'm back. I've been back about 8-9 years. It was due in part to Catholic radio, television, and learned so much.
I get most of my news from EWTN. EWTN is just wonderful. I especially love the Sunday Masses.
Both you guys were a magnificent resource in my journey to come into full communion with the Catholic Church, and thank you very much for being there.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Weird questions for Jimmy Akin. You know, when you get a question about spontaneous human combustion, or a question about Lucifer's rebellion, or when those questions just come one after the other, then you know you're listening to Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. Or you're listening to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, the edition that the patrons get to ask their questions, which is what's available today at mysterious.fm. All right, more of these weird questions for you, Jimmy. Oh, I like this one, Marianne. Thank you. This is grounded in possible short-term future here, the near-term future for humanity. Marianne wants to know, what would be the moral implications of joining an expedition to colonize Mars or other planets, knowing that there would be no access to any sacraments indefinitely?
Well, we can look to the past for information about this question, because this has happened before in the age of sail. When people were crossing oceans to colonize new lands, we can look at what they did. And there have been cases even before the age of exploration and the age of sail, where people would go on business journeys that could last years, or military expeditions that could last years, and they might be deprived of the sacraments for a long time. And the church did not prohibit these things. So, we do have an obligation to receive communion once a year, and we have a responsibility, typically at Easter time, and we have a responsibility to confess our mortal sins once a year, but we're excused from that if it's physically impossible. So if there's no priest around, you can wait longer to do it. And there have been people who went on trips, whether commercial or military or what have you, that would deprive them of the sacraments for lengthy periods. And the church didn't say you can't undertake such trips.
Yeah.
So what happens if you do? Well, if you commit mortal sins, then you need to be careful, and you want to make acts of perfect contrition to reconcile with God before you're able to restore connection with the sacrament of penance. You then will ultimately want to confess, what you did, but it can wait until you have access to a priest. But you can be reconciled with God even before you're able to go to confession by an act of perfect contrition. So you'd want to do those. You also probably would not want to just head out if it's a colony without any priests. You'd want to take priests with you. That's what people in the age of exploration did. When they'd found a colony somewhere, they would bring priests along with them. And I would expect that early on, I mean, maybe not on the first colonization flight to Mars, but very early on, you would have Catholic priests who would volunteer to go to Mars and be dispatched by their bishops as, missionary priests on Mars to minister to the Martian colonists.
I hope that that's the case. The church usually is pretty proactive in thinking about these things. I hope somebody's thinking about priests. I've got some priests I'd like to send. No, that's not that's not the right spirit. But
well, I mean, for example, on cruise ships, it is very common to have priests on cruise ships to minister to the Catholics who are on board the cruise ship. And if you're taking a whole bunch of people to Mars, you would expect as long as there's some Catholics there, you would expect priests to go along too.
Yeah, one ministry that I have always loved that we have as Catholics is we have priests who are for people who work in circuses and carnivals. That their ministry is to the people who work in circuses, and then they'll travel with them. I think that's important stuff. So, Marianne, good job.
I want to see a fire-eating priest.
I know. What's his day job when he's out there with the carnival?
Yeah, I want to see a priest do the human volcano.
All right, this one comes from Mark. Mark asks, if Christ made a visit to all continents together with Joseph, Mary, and the apostles, just like a papal visit, before he was crucified, would the world have become Christian?
Well, it depends on what Jesus does when he goes to a place. And there actually are claims that Jesus did go to other places. Now, you'll find some New Agers who say that Jesus went to India when he was young. There's no evidence for that. And really, there's no good evidence for any of these claims. But you do have claims. Mormons, for example, claim that after the crucifixion, Jesus came to the New World and evangelized Native Americans and people who were in America. And they started a church, and it lasted for a few centuries. You'll also find some people in Britain who would claim that either before or immediately after his ministry, Jesus came to England and came to the island of Great Britain. And they'll say it was connected with the tin mining industry, and that Joseph of Arimathea was in the tin mining industry and would go to Britain for commerce, and he would bring the boy Jesus or the Virgin Mary along with him. And there's even a famous British song called England's Mountains Green, which has a lyric that says, "And did those feet in ancient times walk upon England's mountains green?" Well, the feet they're talking about are Jesus's feet. No. And so you have these British claims as well. Now, there isn't good evidence for claims that Jesus lived anywhere other than Israel and Egypt. And Egypt only briefly when he was a toddler. But it's going to depend on what happens there. In the Mormon account, he did found a church, but it didn't last. In other accounts, like the British account, and the Indian account, he didn't found a church there. So if he went someplace, even taking Joseph, Mary, and the apostles with him, they evangelized and founded a church. Well, depending on how long they stayed there, the church might become established and might last for some period of time and might even last to the present day. But that's not the timeline that we live in, where he didn't make a world tour of all the continents and set up churches everywhere. Instead, he made a tour of Israel, and actually, I guess now that I think about it, he also got up into Syria, like when he met the Syrophoenician woman, and went to Tyre and Sidon. But he stayed in that little area of Israel and the surrounding territories, and then he let the 12 apostles go elsewhere and found churches. but he didn't have a first century worldwide evangelistic campaign. If he did, it might have had the success it has would depend on the two factors of how much grace God gave and how humans responded to that grace.
Mark, thank you very much for that question. It's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. A whole bunch more to go. So on we go with Seth's question. Did Jesus have opinions, such as having a favorite food or favorite color? Would these be the results of random biology and environment as he grew up?
So I think the answer is presumably yes. Jesus did have opinions of like, I prefer this to that. I think that would definitely be, I'm not sure that would be the case with favorite color, because not everybody has a favorite color. I don't really have a favorite color. When I was a boy, my favorite color was green, but I think I picked it because I thought it was cool and because everybody had a favorite color at that age. But as an adult, I don't really think of having a favorite color. I do have foods I prefer, and which foods I prefer is a combination of at least two factors. One is habituation, what is available in your environment. This came home to me in a notable way some years ago when I was over at the house of a friend whose family was vegetarian. And so I'm there, my friend is there, his wife is there, they've made a vegetarian meal, and they have two daughters who are like 1 and 2 years old, or 1 and 3 years old. They're very small children. And I see these, and they've got this big salad for us to eat as one of, the elements of the meal. And I see these 1 and 2 year old children reaching out and begging for pieces of lettuce. And it's like, okay, I know I'm in a vegetarian household when the kids are begging for pieces of lettuce, because most people would not view lettuce as the most appetizing, delicious food. But it's actually kind of bland. But that was what was available to these kids in their environment. And so that became what they wanted. We tend to, of the food we have available to us, we tend to like certain things and not other things. And this actually tracks, to go into matters of science for a moment, this actually tracks with age. I don't know if you ever watched Star Trek Deep Space Nine, but
sometimes,
they have this, the race, the Ferengi, the merchant race that has the ginormous ears. Well, there's an episode of that where I think it's Quark, who's a Ferengi, is talking about Ferengi children. And he says, children, everything they pick up goes straight into their ears. Well, okay, that joke is based on the fact that human children tend to put things in their mouths.
Right.
And puppies do the same thing. That's how they explore. That's why puppy biting exists, is because puppies are using their mouths as a tool to explore their world and get a sense of things. Well, humans do that too by sticking stuff in their mouths. And so very early, parents are often amazed at, my kid will put anything in his mouth. And then after a few years, the kids become picky eaters, where there is a narrow range of foods that they will consume, and they don't want to try anything that falls out of their normal range. It's all chicken nuggets and hot dogs and pizza. Well, why is that? Well, the answer is when we're born, our bodies do not know what part of the world we're going to be living in, because humans can travel. You can be born in any part of the world, but you've got the same human biology. That means you don't know what the local food plants are when you're born. So you need, as you get weaned off milk, you need to be receptive to eating anything, whatever is available in the local area. But there are probably things in the local area that are bad to eat, that are poisonous or would cause, gastric distress. And so you also need to be guided by your parents in what is safe to eat locally. And so what happens is kids are born with an initial openness to eating anything. And then, as they learn from their parents what the local cuisine is, they become rigid and they don't want to eat anything that's not in the local cuisine because it might be dangerous. And so that's why they go from being super open to super picky as they mature. Well, so Jesus was born in the ancient Near East. Mary and Joseph would have brought certain foods to him that were common, and he would have had the same process that other children do as they mature, and selected certain foods as his favorites. He also, so that's the first factor, is food availability. The second factor is biology. Now, humans pretty much all like sweet things because sweetness is a sign that it's filled with carbohydrates, and carbohydrates are a source of calories. Humans also like fat. Fats are flavor enhancers because they trap the aroma and taste particles in food and intensify it. That's why you add fat to a lot of recipes to make the food more flavorful. So certain basic things are programmed into us biologically. Incidentally, cats, they don't have taste buds for sweet because they're obligate carnivores and meat is not sweet. Oh. So cats don't care at all about is something sweet. They can't even perceive it. But humans can. We can digest carbohydrates. We're omnivores rather than obligate carnivores. And so we can taste the sweetness to tell us this is a good source of carbohydrates. Now, there are more particular preferences, though, and presumably those are a matter of what I personally have habituated myself to. And it may be also the things I eat the most are the things I've habituated myself to. And so I tend to prefer those things because I'm used to them. But also, presumably, I have inbuilt biological preferences that vary from other people's because of my genetic code and the way my genes manifest. And so it's very likely that, and what allergies I have and things like that. Some food preferences, like some people will say, I don't like that food because it upsets my stomach.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
I have that. A lot of root beers will upset my stomach. And so I like the taste of root beer, but it tends to upset my stomach. And so I tend to avoid it. And other people, may not like a food because it upsets them or gives them hives, or it may affect them in a way they're not even consciously aware of, but it drives their preference. And that presumably was true of Jesus as well.
Seth, you brought us right to the end with that weird question. Only mildly weird question. Lots and lots of great weird questions. If you've got one, you want to send it to us, you can send it to radio@catholic.com. We forward those on to Jimmy, or if you have another way of getting in touch with Jimmy, as many people do, because he's out there on the internets, go ahead and send it to him.
Just flag it as a weird question so I'll know what bucket to put it in.
All right. Yep. To say, hey, Jimmy, I got a weird question for you, and then give it to him. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, mysterious.fm. Jimmy, thanks. I really enjoyed these 2 hours.
My pleasure. Me too.
That does it for us. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.